All right, let's talk a little bit more about clouds or skies, and just realize that there are many different types of clouds or animated light effects. It could be some fire, it could be the particle modeler that you use to create some rotating puffy clouds, all sorts of really very different types of effects. And some of them are a little bit more the original. Oh, this is really just like moving some snowflakes up or down. You can reverse the direction that you might use as a displacement map, perhaps to show some turbulence on a hot summer day. All right, so lots of different types of animations you can create right here in Howler. And one thing I want to do to explore, perhaps there's one more here. Yeah. So let's go into the animated polar clouds, right? So one thing that is quite interesting is to create some fancy clouds like these that perhaps then you add some motion blur and you get some sort of polar lights, a beautiful show in the sky, and perhaps even add something else to it and add some 3D and perhaps make it disappear in some sort of a vortex. So how do we get to this point initially, right? How do we load this? Let's go and explore some techniques with that. I'm going to load this into Howler, and again we can choose the first to the last frame. Let's load them all. It's only 120 frames, so this is about 4 seconds worth of animation. If you play it at 30 frames per second, if you slow it down, it will take a little bit longer. But what I want to do is explore some techniques to go from one to the other image here. Right, so you might start with a single image. Let's go, for instance, with filter, render, plasma noise, and do something like this one. All right, and so let's store that image. That's one image, and then let's create another one and render plasma noise. And again, I don't care if you use the plasma noise or if you use something totally different. It might actually be a photograph. It might be part of a sky picture, right? So let's say we do something like this. Okay, that's a good one. Let's do that and store that one as well. So we have those two images. I'm going to close and free the prior animation here. And what I want to do really is have those two available to do a transition from one to the other, or use one as a displacement of the other. Right, so these are two slightly different techniques, and you might want to even combine them. All right, so one technique would say basically we need an animation that has this and then transitions to that. Right, and so a couple of ways to do that. One is, first of all, let's create a placeholder with 3 or 4 frames. Let's do 4. And initially, the first 2 frames are going to be like that, and then the last 2 are going to be this one. All right, so I just click on those stored images, the placeholders, the stored copies, and that puts them back in here. You see, I can click here or I can click here to restore that. So from a workflow point of view, that's a really nice thing to have, just a little place to store these temporary images. Now we have this animation going from one to the other, and obviously what we can do is simply right-click here, and we get the tools for the frame editing of this animation, and we can do a time stretch. Right, so when you do a time stretch, let's say we say twice as many, or click that again, and just enter the value. Let's say you want 128 frames, put that right in there. Make sure you do the frame blending, so it's actually doing a transition from one image to the next. And there you go. So now we have a transition. Of course, some of the frames were identical. Frame 1 and 2 were identical, so for a while you don't see any changes here. And then the last 2 were identical too. And so for a while, you don't see any changes here. You could get rid of those. Okay, let's set the in marker around here. Let's go to the end and set the out marker, and then right-click to delete that block. And then we'll do the same thing on the beginning frames. We see changes around here. So let's see, that's the out marker. Then we go to the in marker right here. And so we have this selection of a couple of frames we want to delete. Again, right-click and select delete block. And so now we have deleted those frames. So we now have essentially a transition from one sky image to the other. But it's a blended transition, and that doesn't look quite so dynamic. So there's a few other techniques. Let's go store this one. We could use this one as a starting point though. All right, so let's go store this to disk, and perhaps we'll make it a little bit shorter. Let's go again, right click, this time stretch, it's going to go in the reverse direction. Let's say we do half the number of frames we had. So we only have, oh, we still have, would you like to retime as well? No, we don't need that. Oh, I guess it checks because I did something else with the stabilizer before. All right, so let's say we want to do a transition on this. So one other technique is the motion prediction module. And with that, you tend to either get better transition or wacky transition. And that's really actually what we're hoping for in this case. If we go to the animated motion prediction, what you can do with that is do a transition. Let's do the dry mode and just see what happens. Okay. There you go. All right, so you see some weird wavelets, and that's kind of what we're hoping for. But these are a little bit too small and too high frequency. So I'm going to actually undo that and start from scratch. I'm going to say, here's our first frame. Let's let it be for 2 frames. And then let's go to this one and this one. And then we'll delete all these remaining frames, right? You can actually, when it's only that few, you have a quick select option here. Select all these, and then right-click to delete the block. So that's a very quick way to get rid of those extra frames. So we now have that transition from here to here, and we'll go to the motion prediction module, animated motion prediction module, and we'll go with the dry run, of course, to test this and see, for instance, don't scan for dropped frames, and simply see what happens when we have 7. So you see an odd transition really quick here. Let's give it more frames. Let's give it 12 tweens. So we'll have a total of 25 frames. See how it's doing a nice, very interesting transition. Let's go even higher. Let's do 33. So now we're looking into a total of 67 frames. Now some of them are still not animated because the first 2 frames are identical, and the last 2 frames are identical. So there is a portion of it that's not going to actually show animations. But I think what I'm going to do is, let's say 123. I'm going to push the limit here a little bit. 247 frames. And so now you see some interesting, that looks more like some turbulence, right? There's some turbulent sky, and that's really what we're looking for. All right. So let's go and apply that. And once we have that, we can add contrast, and we can also use the other technique I wanted to explore, which is to apply some displacement, one image displacing the other. Right, that can be done across the animation as well. So first of all, we just did a motion prediction. The first frame here will be a duplicate of the last frame. So we'll go and delete this one. And then there are some frames that don't show any movement. Again, that's because we had duplicates. So I'm going to go and set the in marker here, set the out marker there, right click to delete those frames in that block. So we have about 200 or even less, 150, I guess, roughly 137 frames left, and we get a nice little transition. And that's really what we're looking for. See how those things seem to be flowing into more of a bubbly nature now. It's easier to see if you expand the dynamic range and then also even add some more contrast. There you go. Let's say we go to add some contrast, perhaps like this. Something like that might be good too. Okay, oh, I did that just on this one frame, but you can do that over the entire animation. All right, so but now let's take a look at one more option. We go to the swap image and load one of these, this one or this one, and go back to the main image. And what we'll do is we'll use the image that's in the swap now to displace the images we have in the animation here. Right, so for instance, if we look at the filters for displacing, we can displace, and you can change the intensity of that displacement, and that's something you can apply over the entire frame sequence. So the entire animation that's already ongoing is further displaced and looks even more dramatic. right? And then, of course, the animation or the intensity of the displacement. The amount of displacement can be also varied over time, right? And that's done with the timeline. I mean, we have a couple of displacement options here from the regular filter, such as the normal displace. And some of these really will do an excellent job for whatever effect you're looking like. If you want to look through glass and some scattering there, that's another good turbulent one also. But you can't change the intensity or that value on that slider over time, I mean, right? You can change it, but then it's the same amount for each of the frames across the animation. Let's take a look at the pool displays, for instance. That one's really great too. One of my favorites for sure. So you can change some of these parameters, but not over time, right? So let's say we do this here, and that same set of parameters is being applied across the entire frame sequence of the animation. It's still great. It's a great effect, but we might want to even do something to those parameters and make them change over time as we go from the first to the last frame. So that's something you can do in the timeline. If the filter exists in the timeline, not all filters from the filter menu are found in the timeline, but you do have a great number of them, and you see here displays by swap. All right, so you can see there are three. There's the regular display, the cloaking displays, which has a little bit of a coloration, but you can always grayscale it. So this one here you could use to, for instance, start at the first frame with no extra displacement, keyframe that, and then at the last one, on the last frame, go to full intensity on that, right? Keyframe that. And you could do this as a linear transition if you want and apply that. So now you have a further type of displacement because it's changing over time. And that, of course, can create, yet again, very interesting effects. What's more, you can make this a stored copy and make it an animated swap. Remember, so far we were just using the image in the back. That's this image. That's the swap the image in the swap buffer. Well, that one doesn't have to be static either. It can be animated. What you need to do is store it, store the current animation that we have here. Go here to store animation, maybe on disk, so you don't challenge the amount of available disk memory. So here's one animation, right? And here's the original one. I'm going to restore this one. And that one has 58 frames. Wait, how much? This one had more, I think. Yeah, 137. So let's go bring this one to 137 also. I'm going to simply do a right click and time stretch it and say I want 137 frames with frame blending. Okay, so here we go. And so now we have this animation, and I'm going to store this one too, just in case we want to experiment here. Okay, so maybe the short one, original, I don't need anymore. So we have this one here with 137 frames, and we have this one, and I'm going to want to use this one as the displacement through the swap image, the swap buffer. How do I do that? Simply check this box here, use as animated swap image. Right, so now as you're scrubbing through that, it's showing you the regular image, but it's also pulling the images that are here and put that into the swap image. And you can check it actually. If you go to the first frame and then switch to the swap, you can see this image. And then if you go to a different frame, you can see a different image. Right? So it's actually pulling those from this stored copy into the swap buffer while you're scrubbing and looking at the main images here. You can actually also see them both at the same time as you're scrubbing. That's simply done by looking in your toolbar here, not the toolbar, the companion sidebar. At the very top where you see the media, you can blend the two together. Right, click on this, you get a little orange triangle. You right click on that, you can change even the blending mode. By default it's a multiply, but you can also change it to a different blending mode, maybe screen mode. So both images are there to some extent, and you could perhaps do a divide. And that in itself is also a really great way to use it. But now what you can see is that as you're scrubbing through the frames, because it's pulling the animated swap here, you can see that it's indeed combining them in different ways. Right? Okay. So we have the animation in one buffer here, and we have the other one in the swap image, and we can use one to displace the other. or we can use one to combine with the other. Right? So there's many different things you can do with that and experiment there. So one thing I'm going to do is simply do the pull displace on that and see if I have some interesting. It looks like what I want to do is get something that looks a bit like a flow, like a flow of liquids or a gas, maybe atmospheric disturbance on a gassy planet, something like that. Did I just say gassy? Okay. All right, let's go apply that across the entire animation. And you see both things are moving and one is affecting the other and further creating some beautiful dynamic interaction. There it is. And in fact, I can do that again and see if it gets even more interesting. So let's go and displace by swap some more. Perhaps this time I'm going to overdo it a little bit. Just like that. There you go. All right, let's go and clear that selection. I don't know why we got a selection mask there. Oh, I must be hitting something on my keyboard. Let's go and clear. There you go. All right, so we have a selection. We have an animation that looks a bit more turbulent than it was before, and that's what we wanted to do. And of course, at this point, we might want to make sure it's got some interesting dimensions. Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it an even number? You don't want odd numbers. If you cropped this, for instance, one thing you might want to do is make it seamless, make it full dynamic range, so you don't have anything. You do have some pixels going all the way to black, some pixels all the way to white. You want to make sure it's grayscale. Let's just do so. Maybe, I know there's a couple of different algorithms to turn that to grayscale. Another thing you might want to do is make it seamless. All right, so make seamless, and you can overlap the sideways edges or the top and bottom edges. Maybe we don't do this one. Maybe we'll use this as a sky, or we need a little bit. Let's keep it a little bit there and make this one seamless. And that's an interesting way to use it as a sky in PuppyRay. Right, even as an animated elevation map, actually, if you want some sand dunes or something like that. But most importantly, as a sky in the background. So for this to become the sky, one thing you'll need to do is pick this up as an animated brush. All right, so one thing you can do is you can store it. Let's go store this animation that we have now. Store this again to disk. And there it is. And so that's our sky. We don't need the others anymore. Make sure you save some copies of it, though, just in case. And so what we want to do is use this as an animated brush. Right? So you can copy that to use as animated brush. And be careful, though, that takes a lot of memory, right? So you don't want to run out of memory. You can always run the Windows Task Manager to see how much memory your dogwaffle.exe task is already using, and if it gets close to 2 gigabytes, it's probably time to free up some stuff. So here we go, and we have this in the brush. We can store it, store a copy of this custom brush, and there it is. And of course, you can verify it. If you look at the film strip, there it is. These are all the frames in your brush now. All right, this is the film strip of your brush. All right, so let's simply minimize that. That's going to be our sky in PuppyRay, and the terrain itself, the elevation map, might still be animated too. That of course is going to look very wacky, but hey, why not? Let's go and get creative here with. Let's go make some space, some room for some more real estate, and I'm going to move this guy over here. Make this, and then that way we have room for the interface there. So I'm going to go to PuppyRay GPU version, and there it is. So we have to choose the sky, and we have the sky here from our custom brush. We can make that global illumination activated, make it a little bit brighter, and if we go and look with the camera up, we can see our sky is here, and it's going to be moving. As we go through the frames, as we render through the frames, the sky is going to be moving. Now, we also have potentially the terrain itself moving, right? But that's going to be only if we go to the more option here and say animate each frame. Right? So I keep that for the very end. One thing I'll do is well, you know what? Let's just do render that. That's good enough. We could do a little bit of other effects, a bit of movement in the camera, perhaps. In fact, let's do that. You know, let's move the camera. At the beginning of the animation will be something like this here. Oh, and I want to see the sky reflect in the water too. So let's position our camera in such a way that we have a bit more sky to look at and a little bit more water to look at as well. There, that should definitely show us a bit more of that. We can also make the sky, the water a little bit less turbulent. Reduce the amount of let's see, what's that? The frequency, 0.1, so the distance is bigger between the big waves, and even reduce the amount of waves, the water height, the wave height. So there you go. I didn't make it transparent. We don't necessarily want that or need that here, because what I want to do really is get the full reflection. So let's not make it transparent, and then that way we get a better idea of what the sky looks like by looking at it in the bottom here too. We can zoom in a little bit perhaps, and so our camera is going to move from here going down. Right? So we'll go from here, keyframe that, go down to the last frame and move the camera looking down, and perhaps increase the brightness a little bit on that. There you go. Okay, keyframe that. And so now we have simply an animation. The terrain is not being animated. The elevation map, even though it could, because we have actually an animation in there, but we do have we didn't enable here animate each frame. So if we do that, then the terrain, the landscape is also going to be moving. Let's do both cases, right? So let's do a rendering first, and I'm going to do these really quick, not the highest quality. It'll be very grainy. I don't have a fast system here, so it's not going to be pretty. If I render it at full high quality, it's going to take too long for each frame. But you see, this is roughly what it's going to look like if we render this in better quality. All right, so this is the high quality, not the best possible. We can certainly do better. Here, I'm going to use the medium quality. Just make sure we have a little bit of anti-alias, three steps. And here I'm going to go to 0.8, a little bit better, just a little bit. Okay, so let's go and render that with anti-aliasing across the frames. And this time is without the terrain being animated. So we are animating the sky. The camera is moving, the sky images are animated. You can see, you can tell that there is a little bit of dynamic change in the sky itself. The clouds are moving, and that's great. The next rendering we'll do will be where we also check this option for animate with frame, so that each frame, so the terrain itself is going to also be animated because it's pulling it from an animated sequence. All right, let me pause the recording here and I'll be back as soon as it's done. And we are almost done here with the first rendering. There you go. I'm going to call this one done. And so here is our first animation. Let's inspect it. You can see the skies are moving because the animated brush is what's being used for the sky. And then, of course, it also shows in the reflection down there. But on top of that, we have the waves moving and just the whole thing working together. All right, so that's one of the animations. Let's go store this one. And then I'm going to restore the original. I think it was this one. And there it is. And so now I'm going to go back into the PuppyRay. It still remembers the same parameters I just had. The only thing I need to do now is to animate each frame and animate that. And there you go. So now the terrain itself is also moving because it's pulling animated frames from the image sequence here. And oh, I must have, is this rendering every 3 passes? Yeah, I think so. It's going actually pretty fast. for this test render anyway. But you can see the terrain right here, for instance. You see the terrain is evolving and moving. Same here in the lower left corner here. So the elevation map is changing because we're starting from an animation that is actually changing, that is showing some changes. And so the terrain is going to change, the sky is going to change, the reflection, the water is animated. It's just like everything is happening here. The only thing perhaps we can't do on something like that is to also have the volumetric bump maps on the terrain, because, well, we can, but it would look a bit odd because it's volumetric. It's not attached to the surface, and it would look like it's diving or swimming through it. Still potentially an interesting effect if that's what you're looking for. All right, almost done here. I feel this went faster. I'm not sure exactly why. Certainly, we would want to do final render at much higher quality, more refinement, right? More detail. You can see here the ray steps is at 0.008. We should probably go down to 0.002 or 3. And then also the number of AA steps, anti-aliasing, give it at least a dozen, maybe 20, maybe even 40, right? Anyway, we are done with this one, and now this time we see not just the sky changing, but also the terrain. The elevation map has changed over time. All right, well, that's it for creating some wacky animated clouds and using them in even wackier ways. Hope this was entertaining, and hope to see you again on the next one.